Hey, how's it going? Today we're going to be doing a quick beginner's guide to Valewalker on the Dark Age of Camelot Eden private server. There will be 6 sections to this video: playstyle and role, specs for leveling and RVR, realm abilities, temp and important stats, recorder, and then just some quick tips. This guide is coming from almost an entirely solo duo perspective, as that's what I have the most experience with. If you have any questions about anything, feel free to ask in the comments or head over to the Eden Discord and ask in the class channels. Just make sure to check the pinned messages or use the search function first to make sure you're not asking some common questions. Let's start with your playstyle and role. Valewalker fits into pretty much any group, whether it's solo, duo, or even up to 8s. They are a hybrid melee DPS that can put out a crazy amount of damage in melee range, but also continue to interrupt and damage a bit at range. Valewalker is one of the best solo classes due to their fantastic kiting ability and big DPS. They also bring some utility to groups in the form of AoE and PB-AoE disease. The only time that I find I don't get groups as often is in Zergs. That's not to say it isn't fun or useful in Zergs, but there are a lot of Valewalkers out there and other classes tend to bring more RPs. Let's talk specs. Let's start with how to optimize at character creation. While this isn't necessary, as most won't notice the small stat and resist changes that race choice and starting stats bring, they are worth mentioning. Race-wise, I'd say that most people go for Self. It gives the most even stats and gives a good amount of quickness. You could also go Furbolg for more strength for max melee damage, and Slyden has the most intelligence for better casting. If you weren't aware, you can adjust your starting stats here. I'd split your starting stats between strength, dex, and constitution. You could also swap out the extra con for quickness if you'd rather have some protection against attack speed reduction debuffs rather than extra health. For leveling, you can either optimize or be lazy. For the lazy folks, just go Scythe at level, then Arb, and then rest in parry. However, if you would like to be more optimized for those leveling BG fights, then the best path is 1 through 28, full Arb, rest Scythe, 29 through 34, full Scythe, rest Arb, 35 through 43, full Arb, rest Scythe, and then 44 and above, full Scythe, rest Arb. At 50, there's basically one spec that most people go for, which is 50 Scythe, 40 Arb, and 15 parry. There are a couple reasons for that. Scythe is your main damage, and going lower Arb only loses out on the PB-AoE disease, which is not the most useful, considering you already have 2 other sources of disease from the proc and the casted AoE disease. Along with that, the level 50 Scythe skill has a nice heat damage proc on it that is the second part of your frontal chain. For champion level abilities, it's basically mandatory to grab the magical resist line. After that, you could go for the instant armor factor or absorption buff, or just the cure disease and poison. Let's talk realm abilities. Your first pick of realm abilities is going to be the usual Purge 2 and Longwind 1. They allow you to sprint indefinitely with an endurance potion and get out of any debilitating effects such as debuffs, poison, and most importantly, CCs. After that, your choice of RAs heavily depends on what kind of content you want to be doing. Luckily, we now have dual spec stones on the Eden Free Shard to let you have 2 specs at once. I'll start with solo RAs. For solo, you're going to be wanting to be much more resilient. In my opinion, sustain is much more important than big damage when soloing, especially for Valewalker, who already puts out a good amount of damage. So to start, you'll probably be wanting a bunch of Mastery of Parry. I'd aim for at least Mastery of Parrying 5. You will also likely want to bump your Purge up to at least Purge 3. After that, I'd add in some Avoidance of Magic to reduce the amount of magic damage you take. Then Ignore Pain is also a great choice for the large heal that isn't affected by disease. Once you're a bit tankier, getting some Mastery of Pain to increase your crit chance is also great. A good Realm Rank 5L1 solo spec might look something like this: Longwind 1, Purge 3, Mastery of Parry 5, Avoidance of Magic 5, and Ignore Pain 1. For group or Zerg content, the priorities change a good amount. You probably won't be needing Mastery of Parry, and instead you're going to be wanting a lot of Determination to make CC affect you less. You will also want Ichor 1 to reset root and to have an uninterruptible CC. Dazzling Aura is also good for group content to help reduce the damage your group takes from magic. A good Realm Rank 5L1 group spec might look something more like this: Longwind 1, Purge 2, Det 9, Ichor 1, and then some passives like Mastery of Pain 2 or maybe like Mastery of Focus 1. Let's talk about temps and important stats. Valewalkers are notoriously difficult to temp, so unless you're willing to spend a whole lot of plat trying to get some perfect rogs, you'll have some holes in your temp. Like with every class for the Eden Free Shard, there are a good number of readily available temps to use on both Zencraft and on the class's Discord channel. Most stats and TOA bonuses are useful to Valewalkers due to being a hybrid class. Strength is your damage modifier for your Scythe. Intelligence and Dex are important for your casting stats. Intelligence will increase the damage of your life taps, and Dex will increase your casting speed. TOA bonus-wise, melee speed is great. Melee and styled damage are also good. For casting bonuses, cast speed, spell range, and resist pierce are all good. It's also good if you can manage to fit in some power pool, as hybrids tend to have much smaller pools than pure casters. Armor factor is also great if you can manage to fit it. There are a few items I would consider pretty important to carry. For example, having the Hot Cloak is fantastic. Dragon Scythe for the weapon skill and celerity proc, a 3.5 speed celerity scythe Rog, and I also like to carry around the champ level 10 scythe as well for the melee resist and fumble. I tend to swap to that when I'm stunned to reduce the amount of damage that I'm taking. A lot carry around a legendary scythe as well that's either heat or cold. Some other common items would be the Dragon Slayer chest, other double proc armor for arms and legs, in particular the Summoner's Hall sleeves and the Dragon Slayer legs. It's also pretty much mandatory to have a swap between sword and shield for casting and scythe for melee. You can also toss a useful charge on the sword like a DD charge or a disease cure. The other important part of a temp, especially when soloing, is having the correct charges. Stat charges can be dumped from your inventory, meaning you can just buy a few DF rings or something like that with those on them. If you want to get the most out of your charges, you'll want to have some buff bonus and spell duration swap items. They're fairly easy to get nowadays as Rogs, and you can search for them using the item database filters. If you don't want to get those, then you can instead pick up the Mytherian of Endless Demand. This will max out your buff bonus and spell duration for the cost of having a heavy debuff applied to you while you have it on, and for 15 seconds after taking it off. This debuff does practically make you a free kill though. On Valewalker, I run Dex Quick, Strength Con, and Haste. Occasionally I use the melee absorption buff, but the 5-minute cooldown really hurts, and I like having reactive uses like the DD charge for interrupts or the hot cloak. Let's go over my Valewalker recorders. On all of these, I tend to include a weapon swap to make sure I'm using sword and shield when casting, and my scythes when in melee. There are 4 main buttons that I like to set. Side stun and frontal, which is the one I'm using the majority of the time. Parry chain and frontal, which I don't use terribly often, as most of the time just getting an extra frontal chain proc is better. A back stun and side chain button for when I absolutely need to get a stun off. A life tap stack, where I put immolation in front of the normal life tap. And then just a CL buff button. Let's go over some basic tips. For beginners, there are a few things to keep in mind when playing Valewalker. Like any other melee, strafing using A and D make you miss. For me, the way that I solved this was, for a little while, I just removed A and D from my keybinds to make sure that I never hit them. It's a bit annoying at first, and you can't really pick around corners as well, but it helped me break the habit, and for the first time I felt like I could really play a melee well. Valewalker gameplay basically revolves around either kiting using the frontal root and the life tap to recover health, or using the side chain to put out massive amounts of damage. When kiting, use the frontal root to get space and turn your camera while running to watch if your opponent is casting something on you. If they are, turn using face and interrupt with an insta, either the snare or the dot, followed up with casting your life tap. Because the Valewalker's root has no immunity, you can pretty much keep this up forever or until your power runs out. If you didn't know, you can turn off the auto turn in your settings here and add a keybind here in order to reset your camera manually. One thing that you should keep track of, especially when grouped, is that both your frontal root and your side chain DD are AoE, meaning it's great for getting groups off of you in a 1vx situation, but you've got to be careful to not break mezzes and other CC with it when you're grouped with others. Most commonly for me when breaking mezzes when I was dueling with the Bard. It's also worth noting that the Blizzard Blade skill is a PB AoE, meaning the closer you are to your target, the more damage you'll do. If you're struggling to hit your side chain, I'd suggest just sheathing your weapon completely and waiting until you're in the correct position before hitting the skill. One move that works way too often after kiting or right on the engagement is to run through them and face their back as soon as you get past through them. Pretty often, people keep running through you and you can land that back stun. When popped by an archer, you can use Nature's Shield, which is basically an engage, so you can block the arrows while running at them. Alright, I think that's all I got for you, so if it helped, a like would be cool, and I also plan on releasing guides for the other classes that I've played, so if you want to see those, subscribe. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you out on the frontiers.